Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Study Hall, where we dig deep, and today we're going to be digging deep on the Laken Riley Act.
Okay.
This was signed into law just a couple days ago on January 29th, 2025 by President Trump. And
Wow.
essentially what this law does is it mandates the detention of non-citizens who are charged with theft.
Interesting.
Now, this is something that's creating a lot of waves, and we're going to kind of unpack all the arguments for and against the law so you can walk away feeling like you really understand what's going on.
Yeah, it's interesting because, even when you go on the White House website, and you try to find some details about the act, there's very little there.
Right.
It just gives the title, the date, and like a very brief description of the purpose.
Right.
It's like they're really leaving it up to us to figure out what this all means.
It definitely highlights the need for a deep dive. And I know that sometimes looking at legislation can feel a little bit like homework, but that's why we're here to break it down together.
Absolutely.
So let's start with the arguments in favor of the law. Some of the pros?
Yeah, so the pro side seems to be focusing on a few key points.
Okay.
One is the idea that this is going to strengthen immigration enforcement.
Okay.
The idea is that the threat of detention will act as a deterrent for people entering the country illegally or overstaying their visas.
Right. And I've also heard people talk about public safety as being an argument in favor of the law.
Definitely.
With the thinking being that if somebody is charged with theft, detaining them regardless of their citizenship status might prevent further crimes from happening.
Exactly. And it really kind of brings us back to a very familiar theme in immigration policy, and that's this idea of balancing individual rights with this need for societal security.
Right.
And we've seen this throughout history. You look back at things like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 or Operation Wetback in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And there's always this tension between protecting the nation and making sure that individual liberties are upheld.
Right. And it really makes you wonder about the effectiveness of these policies. Like, did those actually achieve what they set out to do, or did they just create a bunch of unintended consequences?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's one we need to keep asking as we talk about the Laken Riley Act as well.
Absolutely.
Now, moving on, proponents of the act also say that it sends a strong message against crime.
Right.
And this is particularly targeted, I think, towards communities that are concerned about illegal immigration.
Okay.
They see it as a symbolic action that demonstrates the government's commitment to addressing these issues.
That's interesting how they're trying to frame it like it's almost like a symbolic victory against crime.
Right.
But what about the other side? What about the cons? What are some of the main criticisms that are being raised?
So one of the biggest concerns that I've heard is this idea of due process.
Okay.
Critics argue that detaining people simply based on charges, without an actual conviction, really violates that fundamental principle of innocent until proven guilty. Right. It really does make you think, imagine being detained for weeks, months, even longer, just because you're accused of something.
Absolutely.
Like, it's a very scary thought.
Yeah. And you also have to think about the resources involved.
Right.
What kind of strain is this going to put on Homeland Security?
Yeah.
And what about the detention facilities themselves?
Yeah.
They're often already overcrowded and understaffed.
That's true.
So, where are all these people going to go?
Right. It's a good question.
And it's a huge logistical challenge.
Yeah. And this kind of leads into another argument against the act, which is the broader immigration implications.
Yes.
People are looking at this and saying, this is just part of this trend towards much stricter immigration policies.
Right.
And it could end up really disproportionately impacting certain communities.
That's right. And they also ask, why is theft being singled out?
Yeah.
Why not assault or fraud or any other crimes?
Right. So that selective targeting really raises concerns about potential discrimination and profiling.
So we've got these due process concerns, resource drain, broader immigration implications.
Yeah.
What other arguments are critics making?
There's also the potential legal and humanitarian challenges,
Yeah.
Will this kind of mandatory detention policy hold up in court?
Yeah.
Will it be found constitutional?
Right.
And also, how will this impact the treatment of detainees, especially in a system that's already really struggling?
So for our listeners out there, what are your thoughts on all of this? What resonates with you? What questions do you have?
I think for me, what's most important is to remember that laws don't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
They're a reflection of our values, our fears, our priorities as a society.
That's a good point.
And the Laken Riley Act really forces us to look at these issues in a very direct way.
Absolutely. And as we move forward, it's really important that we all stay informed. have these conversations and demand accountability from the people who are representing us.
Couldn't agree more. And as you learn more about this law, I think it's also important to ask yourself, how might this affect my community? What are the potential long-term consequences for immigration and for public safety as a whole?
Those are really great questions to think about.
Yeah.
And remember, this is just the start of the conversation.
Absolutely.
So we really encourage you to, read up, explore different perspectives, and come to your own conclusions.
Exactly.
So thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Study Hall.
Bye, everyone.